This is Triaging Time, and I'm your host, Dan Luna. Today's show, we have Professor Chris Frueh. Professor Chris is a clinical psychologist, professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii, and clinical professor of psychiatry, trauma and resilience center, University of Texas, health science center, Houston, Texas. He has 30 years of professional experience working with military veterans and active duty personnel, and he has conducted clinical trials, epidemiology, historical, and neuroscience research, primarily with psychiatric patients, prisoners, and combat veterans. He has co-authored over 300 scientific publications, including a historical analysis of U.S. Army suicides dating back to 1819, and a current graduate textbook on adult psychopathology. Professionally, he has worked with combat veterans since 1991. He has consulted to U.S. Congress, Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, U.S. State Department, and the National Board of Medical Examiners. He has published commentaries in the National Review, Huffington Post, New York Times, Time, and Washington Post, and has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, Washington Post, Scientific American, Stars and Stripes, USA Today, Men's Health, and Los Angeles Times, among others. Under the pen name Christopher Bartley, he has also published 9 novels, including They Die Alone, and most recently, A Season Past. Wow. Chris, that's awesome. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you giving us your time today.
It's my pleasure, Dan. Glad to be here. We've had some great conversations over the years, so looking forward to continuing them here.
I'm really excited for today, and I'm gonna kick this off with a fastball. Life, leadership, volatility, and trauma. With our current state of affairs, COVID-19, and the amount of knowledge that you have, the time that we have is just not enough. And I would like to just hit the top highlights right off the bat. Like if you could share key takeaways from what you're seeing right now, and that's all the time you had, what would you share with our audience?
Well, Dan, this is a weird and different experience for virtually all of us. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty ahead, and people have anxieties about their health, the health of their family members, the future of the economy and their own personal finances, and just sort of how are we going to proceed, socially as a society. And depending on your age, your occupation, your people are experiencing this in different ways. My overall, thought about all of this is, as a nation, as a society, as a global, community, we're going to be fine. We're going to get through this, and we're going to learn some lessons. And 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now, everything's going to be functioning. Things will probably be different, but we're all going to be fine for the most part. I think the most important thing people can do is just kind of look around you and take care of yourself and the people you're with. And that means not panicking, not being too anxious, and try to get into a daily routine. Sleep, exercise, talk to the people you love, talk to your friends, and do whatever school or work you can. And then get up and do it again tomorrow.
What are some of the most common issues that you're seeing with some of your patients?
Well, so let me define the word. Let me not use the word patient. Let me use the people I talk to in the military community, in the first responders community, but also young people, the students. I've had a lot of conversations with my students the last few days, and I think one of the challenges is for people that are in a home together. Couples are getting on each other's nerves. children are getting antsy. Parents are trying to help children learn, trying to help children maintain their sanity while cooped up maybe inside, and certainly separated from friends and such. That's a big issue. I think there's concerns that people have about their health and the health of their loved ones, and how do we do things like, is it okay to go grocery shopping? Can I go to the store to pick up something if I need it? How to balance the stay-at-home part of our lives with the requirement or the necessity of leaving the home sometimes. And then I think the other issue and the thing that I think you and I have been talking about is kind of what to expect for the first responders, medical personnel, police, fire department, nurses, everybody working in hospitals today, and kind of what are they going through and what would we expect from them, both in the short term and the long term. So there's a lot of ways we can go with this. What do you think? Where do you want to which part of this do you want to chew on first?
I would like to start with the first responders and almost work backwards. So go maybe first responders, folks in business, and then to the home. And depending on time, if we need to, we'll do another one, a part 2, if you will. But if we can maybe just hit some general overview on or some high points on those 3 areas, and then we'll see where we're at on time. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
So starting out with, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, let's specify who we're calling first responders. Usually that's police, all law enforcement, fire department, EMS personnel. But I think in this situation, our first responders heavily include medical personnel in hospitals and clinics. People who are, that includes nurses and doctors, obviously, but it also includes the staff that have to go in and work in labs, that have to stand behind the counter in clinics and pharmacy formularies and so on. There's a lot of people who kind of are the unsung heroes here. And we almost could consider the people that are moving the food and supplies around the country. People that really cannot do their jobs remotely. They may not be directly interfacing with people known to be at risk or diagnosed with coronavirus, but they're out there, with some level of exposure themselves. But let's start with medical personnel. Let's talk about what their lives might be like right now. And I'll tell you, I'm in quarantine at home in Hawaii right now. I'm on day 8 of my quarantine, not because I have any symptoms, but just because I was out and about in the world and was spending some time with some of the very first responders we had, some of the folks that went in and did the evacuations of Americans from the city of Wuhan, China, and brought Americans home in early February. So I was working with some of those folks, and so now I'm doing my own sort of self-imposed quarantine at home. But when I was in Houston last week, and for the last few weeks, I was staying at the Marriott Hotel in the Texas Medical Center, which was pretty much empty of people. But every morning, I would see lines of people coming in to work in the hospitals all around me. Those folks were coming into work every day. Some of them were wearing masks. Some of them were wearing kind of makeshift masks. None of them really seemed to have the N95 masks. And this was, over a week ago now. But they're out there, and they're doing their jobs, and they're going into an environment that is for them potentially risky. It's certainly unpredictable because they don't know what they're going to encounter that day. There's usually no way to just look at a patient or another person and know if they're symptomatic or know if they're carrying the virus themselves. So, there's uncertainty and risk and probably a certain amount of anxiety and fear involved in that.
So what's some of your thoughts or advice that you would share with those folks?
Yeah. Well, one is for those folks, that's what they been doing all along. So this is a new scenario, but it's not completely new. Those folks are, our medical personnel deal with a certain amount of risk and uncertainty all the time. Now it's ramped up a little bit right now, and we have concerns that we don't have enough supplies, enough masks, maybe even enough ventilators in certain areas. So that's an additional stressor on people. But I think there's a reality here that in some ways this is a little different, but it's also what these folks are used to. I know there's a lot of psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health experts out there communicating to the public and talking about how to manage anxiety, how to manage fear. My own view is this is probably not going to be an event of or an era of the magnitude of anxiety and mental illness that some of these folks are predicting and worrying about. I just don't see it being that bad. And if we go back, there's lessons we can learn from prior events and prior experiences. So let's take 9/11, what happened in Manhattan on September 11th, 2001. There was, obviously the Twin Towers went down. A lot of people were affected by that, directly or indirectly. Most of America saw that on TV. Most of America, who is old enough now to remember it, remembers it very clearly as a defining moment of our lives. In the weeks and months after 9/11, there were a lot of people in the mental health community predicting that we would have a mass epidemic of post-traumatic stress disorder after 9/11. And there were some initial papers done by some of the epidemiologists that seemed to suggest that in fact was going to happen, that we would have essentially an entire country, an entire nation traumatized, and that we would have a lot of mental illness, a lot of anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The reality is, Dan, that didn't happen. All those predictions were way off. When they finally completed the really good epidemiological studies in New York and other areas around the country, what they found was almost no long-term bump or increase in PTSD. In some places, especially in Manhattan, there was a short-term increase in anxiety, but within 3 to 6 months, it had completely almost dissipated. Interestingly, PTSD, which is what people think of when they think of trauma or stress, is not necessarily the thing we want to be most concerned about. So some people get depressed, some people just get anxious. Other people start turning to alcohol, drugs, or tobacco. That would be my main concern right now in terms of what's happening at the population level in America, but also for the people who are the first responders. Alcohol use is legal, it's available. We're seeing stories of liquor and beer sales going kind of through the roof. I don't know how true that is, but I would say that's possibly one of the short-term things just for people to be aware of. And that's probably an understandable way of coping for the short term, but it's going to have long-term problems for people, including that alcohol weakens our immune systems. So anybody who's a first responder and you're having a few drinks at home in the evening to help yourself unwind and relax, maybe give that a second thought, because you're actually reducing your immune system's ability to defend our bodies if you're drinking. The other thing that maybe was one of the lasting effects of 9/11 was tobacco use or nicotine. A lot of people either started or restarted smoking again after 9/11. And when they looked at the epidemiological studies a couple years later, there was still a little bump in nicotine use.
Are there some better habits that you have seen successful in the past?
Good habits?
Yes.
Like productive habits? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think,
there's not... Sorry, Chris.
It's not rocket science. Mm-hmm. I think a healthy lifestyle that most of us think about and try to maintain at some level in our adult lives is probably even more important now. Get good sleep. Get reasonably good exercise. Try to eat well. Try to minimize drugs, alcohol, tobacco, or avoid it altogether if you can. And try to enjoy time with your family and friends, the people that you have right there in the household, people that you can reach out to via phone or video conference calls. And I think, when people are not working, there's an additional challenge. And that includes everybody who's really just kind of staying at home, but also our first responders that may be doing shifts where they work a few days and then have a few days off. Mm-hmm. Keep a very simple, regimented schedule. Try to get up at the same time in the morning. Make your bed. Have your routine. Get your coffee, newspaper, whatever you do. Try to create a routine and a structure, because I think that's one of the things a lot of us are struggling with, not having our days structured for us by having to be at work at a certain time and have meetings at a certain time and so on. It takes a little more discipline for us to do that, for all of us now to do that.
Any thoughts to process the emotions that's going on right now? I think so often we don't talk about emotions, and yet emotions are such a key element to everything that we do. We'll talk about the physical body, like you've mentioned, sleep, nutrition. We'll talk about maybe mindset, like how you think about something as you're going into a situation, or how you process something. I also think that we tend to skip over the emotional aspect, or we tend to skip over the spiritual or religious aspect to help us process things during tough times. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is something you and I have talked about a lot over the years, so you can help me out with this, because I know you have a lot of good ideas about this too. But I think number one is take care of your body. Taking care of the physical body is the first step towards taking care of our mind and our spirit and our psyche. I think there's different things that we can do for our emotional well-being, and being with friends and family, and just having conversations with the people who matter to you. Ask them how they're doing. Tell them how you're doing. Right there is probably the most important emotional type of activity to do.
Chris,
a lot of people.
If I may just pause right there for a moment. I think what you said is huge. So for somebody who's a first responder, and if we'll just kind of expand that term from how it's typically used, right? So police, firefighter, EMS, to the doctor staff, to the folks that have to go into work. So for them, do you recommend to have that conversation, maybe have that conversation with their partner, so when they return home, set up part of those habits, almost an emotional habit or a communication habit of, hey, it helps me process my fear or today's day, or, hey, maybe I have it and I'm not sure. Like any of those hard conversations, just to have the conversation on the best way for them to process it. Is that something that you recommend or you've seen work?
Absolutely, but with this caveat. It depends on the people in your house. It depends on your partner. And it depends on the nature of your relationship and the ability of your partner to be responsive to that and to handle it. I know some people have a tendency in these positions and situations, have a tendency to protect their partner. They come home and they kind of shield their partner from what they've seen. And I know that you've probably, done this yourself and know what I'm talking about, from your military career. So I think my thought to that is yes, talk to your partner, talk to your loved ones, but with that as a caveat and with that awareness. I think a second thing to do is talk to the people you work with. I mean, really, the other people who are there living it with you and probably a good idea to make time at work for those conversations as much as possible.
So something that I've found with some of the folks that I work with as well is to actually tease out the distinction between thoughts and emotions. So to really be aware of, hey, Chris, this is what I think about this. And then, hey, Chris, this is what I'm feeling right now. Like, I feel a little anxious, or, hey, I'm scared. Is anyone else scared? So to maybe be a little bit more open. And I know that, and I'm speaking in general terms here, for the most part, that doesn't really seem to be the norm in conversations.
Well, people are protecting each other. People are protecting themselves. Some people are in a little bit of denial, but I also wouldn't necessarily assume that everybody's scared. I wouldn't assume that people are anxious, because I think many people are not. They're rolling with this. So I think, leave open the possibility that there's a wide range of reactions, and we shouldn't assume necessarily that somebody's having any one particular reaction. To what you said, though, the thoughts and the emotions, those are separate things, and it's important to have some awareness of this distinction, but also the connection there. And so I talked about the body. I usually think in terms of 4, maybe 5 categories. Certainly one is the body and how we're feeling. 2 are the behaviors, both the behaviors to take care of our body, like exercise, eating right, healthy habits. 3 is the thoughts, and these are not in any particular order here. 4 would be our emotions, and 5 might be spirituality. Some people would say spirituality is part of emotions or part of thoughts, maybe even part of behaviors. But let's put them all together. So if I'm going to come to you, Dan, and say I'm feeling anxious, what I want you to do is to listen and say, tell me about it. I'm here to listen. And then maybe ask me what I'm anxious about. Why am I anxious? And sometimes we can have a feeling that we're not even sure why we're having that feeling. It's in us. We feel the pressure on our chest. We feel the tightness in our gut. But until we verbalize the cognitive explanations for that anxiety, sometimes we're not even aware of them. So I tell you I'm anxious. You say, tell me about it. And then I maybe tell you about some difficult things I saw today and a fear of what's going to happen tomorrow. And then you and I have a chance to have a conversation about the basis of my fears. Are they realistic? What's the likelihood? And what I would encourage all of us to do is when we get to our cognitions and our thoughts, it's really easy to catastrophize right now. CNN, Fox News, and every news outlet out there is catastrophizing things for us. You've got that ticker, the running totals of infected people in the U.S. and the deaths in the U.S. Every story we're seeing right now is a story pretty much of either heartache and loss or of how somebody's struggling to cope with what's happening right now. There's not much, we're not being exposed to much good news right now. So it's really easy to draw the wrong lessons from what are being portrayed in the media. Yeah. So,
hey, Chris, you were talking about when you were going through on the communication piece that I think is really important for people to also dissect. So the distinction between dialogue, discussion, and debate. And I think so often as people are talking about something, they tend to be almost offensive or more of a debate. Hey, Chris, how are you feeling right now? I'm totally fine. Dan, how are you feeling? Hey, I'm super anxious. I'm going into work. I'm seeing all these things. And you're like, oh, there's nothing to be anxious about. You're watching too much news, or hey, you're doing this. So I guess my thoughts during that piece and maybe some recommendations as well is just to hold space. So we often talk about empathy or we talk about emotional intelligence. And I would place this in the behaviors piece that you were mentioned, body, behaviors, thought, emotion, spirit. So now, not to just think about these things or move to a position of judgment or a position of debate, but actually move to a position of holding space, of dialogue, of empathy, and just say, oh, hey, what's going on? Like, hey, I'm okay. That doesn't mean you're okay. And if you're okay, that doesn't mean that it's okay for you to force your thought on me.
Right.
And now we move from like, hey, you're no help at all, and actually I tried talking to you, and now I'm not even going to try talking to you. So now that little bit of an outlet that maybe that individual had, they don't even have that anymore because maybe they're not getting it at home as well. Maybe they're staying at home by themselves. So their only outlet is their coworker or their peer. So that was just some thoughts that I had of just holding space, move from a position of maybe dialogue or from a position of debate to dialogue, and just hold space for that individual and their emotions and what's going on in both their heart and their mind.
Yeah, that's well said, Dan. We want to be empathic. We want to listen. We want to validate. We want to be responsive to the people we care for. We don't want to be dismissive. And yet at the same time, if you're catastrophizing, if you're saying we're all going to die and the sky is falling, I might put my arms around you and hold you and let you say that and cry on my shoulder, but at some point I want to say to you, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at what's really going on here in our world. Let's analyze it together. So it doesn't have to be a debate.
Yeah. So there's an appropriate way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so much too. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you.
I was just going to say, so often in conversations, we want to say what we want to say. And whatever's going on with me is the most important thing. So a question that I like asking within certain moments is how is this helping this situation? Or am I just thinking about me? So just having almost certain cues of, hey, I'm frustrated, and now my frustration is showing up. How is that helping this situation? Or, hey, I'm tired, and now I'm going to take it out on everyone else around me. I'm actually contributing and making things worse. So just having that self-awareness of what's going on, if you will, in the body, because the body holds, our brain, our thoughts, our heart, our emotions, and then you touched on it earlier, our gut or our intuition, right, where we sense things. So just having awareness as we're going through that, and now think of how can we process these things, right? Nutrition, exercise, conversation, maybe some time outside, meditation, prayer, FaceTime with extended family. So there's these rituals or these habits that folks can now implement. And this almost goes into some of the stuff that we've talked about, where something has to happen for now these new behaviors, the pressure has to be on somebody to now implement these new behaviors for a healthier lifestyle because of the pressure that's on them. Instead of already having those habits prior to going into a volatile situation.
Yes. And I would even go so far as to predict a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, many of us will look back on this period and identify some really amazing things that happened and came from it. And I think we'll see that for our whole society, but also among individuals. And I think there will be people in the future. I think many of us will look back and be thankful for some of what we've experienced and lived through at this time. Let me put something else out there. I think for all of us to be mindful of, which is when you're under stress, when you're, for those that, for the first responders, when you're under stress, when you're maybe tired, either from working long hours or working intense hours or both, that's burning through your resources. So your capacity, maybe to be the ideal self, you're not at full capacity to be your best self at those times. And I think this plays out in homes now with families that are in close proximity, getting a little bit of restlessness, a little bit of frustration building. It can happen. It can be easy for people to just kind of get worn out, if you will, or stressed out, if you will, or burned out, or just tired, and then not treat or respond to the people around them as gently or as empathically as they ordinarily would like to. So I think that's something we all want to be mindful of, and we want to have both some self-compassion and some compassion for the people around us.
100%. So
yeah.
So what I like to refer to that is your orbit. So whether it's your orbit, so how that energy that you're putting out, or that feeling that other people get when you walk into the room. So that orbit, whether it's a room at work or a room at home, how do others feel when they're in your orbit? And that's a great point, and it ties into another thing that I hear all the time that I'm not a fan of is, hey, leave it at work.
Yeah.
And I think that's terrible. Leave it at work, or leave it at home. Oh, you're going through a divorce, leave it at home. Or you're having trouble with the kids, leave it at home. You're at work now. So, if I were to stick with your model of the body, that's like, hey, leave it at work. That's like, hey, take your arm off and leave it at home. It's impossible. It's impossible.
Right.
You can't leave it at home or leave it at work. Like, you physically carry your emotions in your body, and they go with you. You carry your past. You carry your thoughts. Like, you physically carry all these things with you. So now just having an understanding of something more realistic of, hey, I can't leave this at home. I'm going to take it with me, or vice versa. And now to have, what I like to say to folks, have a conversation with yourself. How can you process these things? Like, what can help you out of, the things that we've talked about so far? What are these new habits? Or what's a habit that's worked for you in the past that maybe you stopped doing that you can re-implement? And to have the conversations from that empathetic place and hold space for each other, and to maybe show up and it's like, hey, I just need, and maybe the conversation with your partner is like, hey, I need an hour when I get home. I need an hour because I'm introverted and I've been around people all day, or hey, I'm extroverted, I need to talk about these things, or whatever it is, just that self-awareness, communicating it with those around you, and really holding that space just to make everyone's life better that's around you. And if everyone just did that, I think both home and the work environments would be a lot better.
Yeah, I agree. That's that self-reflection piece. Maybe that's something we want to add to the list, is just take a few minutes every day to think and be reflective about how you're doing, and maybe how the people around you are doing.
Yeah.
It also might not be a bad idea for us, all of us, to have conversations with the people in our orbit, specifically about this. Hey, how are we doing? How are we doing?
As a team.
Orbit? Yeah,
that's great. So I love hitting taboo stuff. So I think we've touched on a few things. What we haven't touched on is a spirituality or religious component. What's your recommendation or thoughts on that?
Very simple and not very deep. if you have faith, if you're religious, now's a good time to be mindful of that and to go there. If you pray, pray. If you read scriptures, read scriptures. It's probably a little bit challenging right now with churches and synagogues and mosques being more or less closed down, but that doesn't mean that we can't engage our spirituality.
100%. I love it. So as our time winds down, Chris, I would like you to just kind of hit the highlights of our conversations, like the big takeaways for everyone that's been listening. Just
sure.
Summarize everything that we've hit, not everything, but the highlights.
Oof. Okay. Well, first of all, let's not catastrophize. We're in a weird place right now. Mm-hmm. We don't know really exactly what's going to happen, but humans have endured for a long time. This is not the end of our civilization. A few months from now, we're going to be in a very different place. We're going to know a whole lot more about what we're dealing with. We're going to have better testing, better medical supplies. We are going to have better treatments and maybe even vaccines in the near future. So let's not catastrophize where we're at. Let's not expect that this is going to lead to global, millions and millions of deaths. It might, but it probably isn't going to. Let's not expect, and let's certainly not expect that this is going to lead to mass psychiatric illness. Some of us are going to be a little anxious. Some of us are going to get a little down. But most of that is just going to be transient, temporary reactions. And the best things we can do are things we should be doing anyway. And we tend to, maybe we need just to be reminded of what those are. Get good sleep, eat well, exercise, do whatever work is your work. Stick with your passion, follow your avocation. If you're spiritual, now's a good time to engage that. And be empathic and kind and gentle with the people around you, especially your family and loved ones.
This was great. That was awesome. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. Do you have anything for me?
Oh, I always got stuff for you, Dave.
I know you do. That's why I threw that question out there for you.
Okay, here's my question for you. Mm-hmm. You spent 20-some years at war in the U.S. Navy. What lessons do you have in very short summary? How would you summarize lessons from the stressors, the adversity, and the tragedies of life that you've seen and experienced and been a part of?
Man, there's so much I can say. I'm just trying to distill it down. One thing that helped me was actually exploring what I call both sides of the spectrum. So both the positive and the negative. Hey, maybe there is fear, but I was scared. Stuff that I did before. And I would look at it, I would name it. I was like, hey, you're scared, okay. And then I would look at the other side and try and maybe look at the positive. And that's one thing that I've seen where people just focus on the positive, which I'm personally not against. However, I think there is a lot of power in addressing the negative or the potential negative events and just start preparing for it. Hey, I could get sick. Hey, I'm overseas. I could drive over, step on, an IED, an improvised explosive device. My helicopter could be shot down. I could get shot. Like, all these devastating things could happen. I could get blown up and lose my legs. So I would actually spend time exploring those and actually get okay with it just over time of facing it and almost accepting these things that haven't happened. So I would spend some time in the darkness, if you will.
Like death meditation.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes, I would spend some time there. And then I would come back and I would explore all the positive. Like, hey, none of that's going to happen. So I would explore time using my mind's eye, or being visionary, or visualizing different things. And in the end, it would actually make me more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would just show up in a point of detachment, if you will, or indifferent. And it allowed me just to focus on the task that I needed to in that moment in time, just by addressing both elements, both positive and negative. And I became good with either one. And that it took a lot of visualization, and it was a lot of time spent practicing that. And that was just one thing that helped me out. I'm sure for folks who have been in a volatile environment have their own practices, and for me that was a practice that really helped me. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know we've talked about this before. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I love it. No, that's great, and I think maybe that's a piece of the self-reflection that all of us should be doing right now, and thinking about, well, what is it going to mean if I get sick? What is it going to mean if my spouse gets sick? If my children get sick and can't go to the hospital, get sick with something that's not COVID related. Mm-hmm. I think there is something to be said for doing a little reflection on what are some of the things that I'm scared of that might happen. What is the likelihood of those things happening? What can I do to mitigate or minimize, the damage that these things might cause? Yeah.
Chris, hey, thank you very much. As we get ready to close here, do you have any final thoughts, or are you good with where we're at right now?
I'm good, Ian. I'm good. This was really fun. I look forward to future visits and to seeing how this show progresses over the next few months.
Yeah. I'm excited. Even getting ready for this, it's funny because those same practices, obviously the level of consequence is very different. But as I was getting ready for this, there was nervousness, and I was looking at the excitement, the nervousness of it, and it was just like, hey, whatever happens, going to happen, and just focus on what you need to do. And then the additional thing is also thinking about the bigger picture. So if I could add one more component, hey, I'm not doing this for me, it's for the greater needs, to put yourself out there, to show up to work, to deploy overseas, to drive, to the fire station or the police station or to the hospital or to the business that's supporting folks right now. And it's that higher purpose, that greater calling. For me, that was also very important. And I know for a lot of folks, that's also something important to them as well.
Yeah. Right on.
So, did you have something?
Nope.
You're good. Okay. Thanks, Chris. That'll wrap it up for today. So, if you got something out of this video, like, subscribe, share. Specifically, share this with somebody else that is in that greater first responder community. Hopefully, they'll get something out of this. A lot more to come, and it'll just get better. Once again, thanks, Chris. And remember, you don't manage time, you manage yourself. Leadership starts with you. All right, thank you.